Welcome to part two of this poker vlog. If you haven't seen episode one, make sure you check that out before seeing this. But this video starts after the registration window closes. So it's very fun, it was really exciting, had some bad beats, but overall I think I played well. So sit back, relax, and let's watch this video. Going into the first hand after the break, we look down at ace-6 suited in the small blind. With the blinds at 3,000, 5,000, it folds around to the hijack, who ends up deciding to raise it to 15K. And in this spot, I think this is a fine calling hand. I don't think it's worth a 3-bet. So I just decide to call and everyone else folds. So now that it's heads up out of position, the flop becomes 8-6-6 rainbow. So I decide to check, try and cover up my hand a little bit, and he decides to check back. So the turn brings the 9 of diamonds. I bet 10,000, not trying to lose any value here. And after a little bit of thinking about it, the hijack ends up deciding to fold. So small pot, but we get to take this one down. A few hands go by and I look at Jack 8 diamonds in the middle position. And when it folds around to me, I decide to just call. It's the same Jack 8, Jack 9 situation. I can't get away from it. So I call, and we actually only get the button and small blind to call as well. So we're heading multi-way to the flop, and we see the flop is 8, 9, Jack, all hearts. So it's definitely a scary board. It checks to me. I decide to bet 10K, try and rep that I have at least a heart in my hand. We get a couple folds out of it, but only the small blind calls. So now the turn brings us the 4 of hearts. So now there's 4 to the flush. I decide to check and he checks back. And the river brings the Jack of spades. So I upgrade to a boat. I bet 15,000, and after a little bit of thinking about it, he does end up deciding to call. So I table my hand. We have the obvious winner, and that's a good pot coming my way. I think I could have got more value out of it, but that's all right. That's a good win. Unfortunately, with this next hand, I wasn't able to get any of the pre-flop action, but I look down at ace-jack offsuit in middle position, and the flop becomes king-queen 4 rainbow. So under the gun decides to bet out, and I decide to call. The turn brings the 10 of diamonds, so I upgrade to the nut straight, and I decide to lead out for 30,000, and the under the gun player ends up deciding to call kind of quick. Maybe he's trying to hit his flush draw, but when the river ends up bringing the 9 of hearts, I'm feeling really confident in my hand. He checks and I jam, and he gets out of there quick. The next hand that we're looking at, we look down at the king queen of hearts under the gun. And so this is easily a raising hand. I decide to bump it up to 16,000, which is only 10x above the big blind. This is obviously a good hand to bump up in this position and try and get a lot of callers. Unfortunately, I only end up getting the cutoff to call. So maybe my sizing was a little too big here, but that's okay. At least we're going heads up, and we see that the flop is king 6 3 rainbow. So I'm kind of slow it down a little bit. I decide to check, hoping he leads, but he doesn't. The turn brings the 9 of clubs, so I decide to bet out for 10,000, and he thinks for a little bit, but then ends up deciding to call. I'm not really sure what to try and put him on. Maybe some kind of queen 10, queen 8 or something, but the river brings the 9 of spades. So I decide to bet out for 30,000 here. That board pair on the river was pretty good for me to see, and so betting out of position, he does end up folding. This next hand, I try and loosen up my range a little bit. When we look down at ace 3 of hearts in the low jack, usually I would just call to protect, but I decided to bump it up this time, only to 2 big blinds of 12,000. And we get the hijack, button, and small blind all to call as well. So now that we're heading 4 ways to the flop, we see that the flop is 10-3-7 with 2 spades. It checks through really quick, and the turn brings the king of spades, so the flush gets there. I decided to bet 15K because I'm an idiot and I want to protect bottom pair with the best kicker. So when I do that, the hijack bumps it up to 30, and I have no decision but to fold. This next hand is really interesting, so let me know what you think in the comments. But I looked down at pocket sevens in the big blind, and when it folds around to the hijack, he ends up bumping it up to about 24,000, and then the button goes all in. So I'm stuck in a weird spot here. You know, I think this is worth calling, but with a player behind me who's been playing pretty tight, I don't really know how to go about it. So I decided to go all in for protection, and I'm a little concerned because the hijack player doesn't really fold right away. So I'm hoping that I can get him off of it, and it works, thank God. So now that we're heads up going all in, we see that the opponent has Queen Jack offsuit, and the run out is 10 Jack King. So I'm going to need a miracle here. Turn is the 6, and the river brings the 3 of spades. So lose a good stack, but oh well. After a quick table change, I look down at King 10 offsuit in the cutoff, and we are only going 6 ways at this point. So when it folds to me, I just decide to call, try and keep my position, and that works great because the button ends up folding as well. Small blind calls, and the big blind just decides to check. So the flop brings 9-3 to rainbow. So the small blind decides to lead out for 15,000. And then when the big blind decides to fold, I think it's at least worth trying to see one more card. And when I decide to call, the turn brings the 4 of hearts. So now there's no flush draw out there. And it checks through, and the river brings the 6 of spades. So it checks through really quick, and we see that he has King 8. And so I barely have him out kicked. So I don't really think it was worth me hanging around, but at least it checked through. The last hand of the night, we look down at Queen Jack offsuit under the gun. 2 face cards, 6-handed, I like to think is a raise, especially when you're 6-handed. So I decided to bump it up to 25,000, which is only a min raise. I don't think it's worth throwing too much in there. And we only get the big blind to call. So now that we're heads up in position, we see that the flop comes King Jack 2 with 2 spades. So I have second pair with a good kicker, and he decides to lead out for 25,000, and that's when I decide to call. The turn brings an 8 of hearts, so now there's 2 flush draws out there. He decides to lead out again for 25,000. I decide to call. The river brings the Queen of Spades. So an interesting card because the flush gets there. I upgrade to 2 pair, and he decides to go all in. So I'm sitting there trying to figure out how much it is worth to call. And, you know, I think if he was trying to go for a spade draw, he would have probably bet more at the turn and probably would have played it slow at the river. So I'm sitting there trying to think. He only has me covered by like 10,000. I call, and we see the bad news that he has King Queen offsuit. So a river that I thought was good was my demise. Damn.
All right, so we ended up getting knocked out. I finished in 12th place, but they only paid out 6. So $80 buy-in, not that much, but it was still fun. Happy with how I played, had a good time. So yeah, that's whatever. Catch y'all in the next video. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.